Is the product designer role going to exist in 10 years? Is the product manager role going to exist in 10 years? So what are the right steps people in those roles should be taking?
First, let's not think of ourselves as these predefined roles. Let's just actually think of ourselves as builders. ChatGPT, obviously we all know that it's the fastest growing consumer app to hit 100 million.
Julie Zhu spent 13 years as a designer at Facebook, where she started as an IC and rose to become a VP of product design. She also wrote the Wall Street Journal best-selling book, The Makings of a Manager, and now she is an AI product leader working as a founder at Sundial and building products for companies like OpenAI.
In some ways, I feel like there's a contraction because the whole promise of what AI enables is that each individual person can do more than they've ever been able to do before. You have to know what the AI is doing and whether it's producing exceptional or average work.
How are you day-to-day building your product sense or your product taste?
Go and figure out who are the absolute best. And it's much easier these days. You can go on Twitter and you can probably figure out like who are the best designers on Twitter.
As you're making that transition from IC to new manager, what are the biggest blind spots?
I think the first one is that it's really hard sometimes for people to give up the IC work.
Yeah. What makes a really great product leader in the age of AI? Really quickly, I think a crazy stat is that more than 50% of you listening are not subscribed. If you can subscribe on YouTube, follow on Apple or Spotify podcasts, my commitment to you is that we'll continue to make this content better and better. And now on to today's episode. So, today we are going to break down everything you need to know to become an amazing AI product leader, and specifically how you can work with design, how you can input into design in a way that's really effective. Julie, thanks for being on the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Akash. I'm super happy to be here.
Yes, in San Francisco, meeting in person. After reading your content, I think I've been subscribed to your newsletter for like 3 or 4 years now. It's like a dream come true.
You got to keep kicking me to write more stuff these days.
Yeah.
It's harder and harder to find the time.
Yeah, right? The consistency part is always the challenge there. And that's the looking glass, if you guys haven't seen it. So you recently wrote in the newsletter about the death of product development as we know it. Can you break this down for us?
Yeah, I was really struck by the fact that with all of the innovation that we're seeing in the AI space, that of course it's changing the way that we interact with products. You know, ChatGPT, obviously we all know that it's the fastest growing consumer app to hit 100 million. And, you know, I lived through the time of Facebook back when that was really fast growth, and Instagram, WhatsApp, and now we're just sort of seeing an even steeper trajectory. But yet I didn't feel there was enough people talking about what is changing, not just from the product lens for consumers, but how we work, like how we as product builders actually go about creating products. And a lot of what I would call the kind of current bar is this idea of these very well-defined roles. You know, there's product designer, there's engineer, there's product manager, there's researcher, there's data analyst. And essentially at these larger or more mature companies, the goal is to get all of these different, you know, you kind of think about it as like, my analogy in my head was like Captain Planet. If you ever remember that from like the 80s.
Oh yeah.
Shows my age, but it's like, you know, you have a representative from each of these different disciplines come together to form a group or a pod. And then this pod goes and creates a product. And so, you know, we've gone and we've invested over these last 20 years in building, you know, a very clear type of career ladder for each of these disciplines. Like, I think there's good standard industry-wide understanding of like what is a intro level designer, what is like a senior designer, what is like an architect designer, obviously even more true for engineering, which has been around for a long time. I think that's true for product management as well, with even your newsletter or the content of people like you, Lenny, and so forth, right? Trying to spread the knowledge of what makes these disciplines what they are. And what I was observing is that that's actually totally changing because of AI. In some ways, I feel like there's a contraction because the whole promise of what AI enables is that each individual person can do more than they've ever been able to do before. You know, AI can take care of a lot of the lower level manual work. It can help a lot with even higher level ideation, not to mention it's getting smarter and smarter. So, every year, every 6 months, we're seeing new models. And so if things continue at this rate, then it's very clear that we're not going to have like all 6 or 5 or however many of these roles come together to make anything. It should be the case that one person or two people or 3 sometimes can have everything that they need to kind of develop an entire end-to-end product.
Yeah.
And if that's the case, then we really need to redefine what it means to be each of these different functions.
Yeah, I think that's kind of the existential question out there for people in each of these roles. When I talk to them, they're kind of worried, like, is the product designer role going to exist in 10 years? Is the product manager role going to exist in 10 years? So what are the right steps people in those roles should be taking to prepare themselves for whatever eventual merging that might happen?
I think the first thing is to try and see if we can remove ourselves from the identity of whatever role title, which is hard because obviously when we start, we want to glom onto something, right? And for me, I know there was, I came in, I actually was trained as an engineer. I joined Facebook. I was on the front end engineering team. But the front end engineering team was kind of also the design team. And I remember, some of my earliest questions are always like, well, what does it mean to be a designer? What does it mean to be a good designer? Who are the older designers or more experienced designers who can help me? And, we all want to maybe learn a craft or a discipline and feel like we know what the lane is. And I think, though, that what this time calls for is for us to try and separate ourselves from those lanes. Like, I actually think it's very, very healthy for us to no longer think of ourselves as, I'm a product manager, I'm a designer, I'm an engineer, but actually to think about these as just different skills and experiences. I mean, we all, even within the realm of product management or design, there's different archetypes. It's not like every single designer is the same. We talk about specific skills. This person is really, really strong at visual aesthetics and craft. This person is a great systems designer. This person is a wonderful 0 to 1 type of visionary, right? But that's true in PM. I think it's true in engineering. I'd rather us talk about the specific skills that people have and also how we can use those skills and the fact that we're good at these particular things to then augment ourselves with tools, AI tools, to kind of help us figure out how we build either the 1 or 2 or 3 person team that can come together to build something end to end. So first, let's not think of ourselves as these predefined roles. Let's just actually think of ourselves as builders or product builders. I quite like that term because I think it's more general purpose. And at the end of the day, the reason we were in that role to begin with was to contribute some of our skills to the art of building something meaningful. So think of ourselves as a builder. Think, okay, what are the skills that I come in where I am much better than the average, maybe today, much better than the AI. I'm sure there are still things today that all of us bring to the table where we can likely have better taste than AI, which you and I can talk about in just a little bit. Figure out how to use that to direct the AI, but then figure out which skills are we lacking that we can then augment either with another person who can complement us or, by figuring out how to perhaps use the AI in a more sophisticated manner. But that's the way to think about it, right? Not in terms of roles, but in terms of skills.
Yeah. And I feel like one of the important things, if you are a designer or you are an engineer or a product manager, is start to learn the craft of those people in those other roles, right? Ask them questions about, well, how are you building this? What I love to do is like shadow people on the job, really empathize with what they're doing so that you understand what they're specially bringing, right? That's way above average from the AI. I think that helps the collaboration a lot.
Absolutely. I think you're hitting on a really important point, which is understanding what great looks like, what the difference between exceptional versus great versus average versus mediocre or less than average. The ability for the eye to discern all of these different sublevels is increasingly important because, again, if we have this very smart technology, AI, that can do a lot of things, the difference between the work you're going to do that's great and the work that's going to be average comes down to you have to know what the AI is doing and whether it's producing exceptional or average work.
Yep.
And if you don't know because you've never been exposed to that skill or your eye isn't well trained, then we can only expect you to do the average of what the AI can do, which isn't going to stand out.
So the critical skill then is product taste or product sense. I think those are the words that people put around it. If you are someone who wants to be that great product leader, how are you day-to-day building your product sense or your product taste?
I think it is a lot of what you mentioned, which is that you want to first identify who are the best at this.
Yeah.
That's always how I start. If I'm trying to learn, for example, when I started Sundial, and a lot of what we do is data analytics, I'm not a data analyst by training, so I know that there's a lot I don't know. The first question is always, what does amazing look like? Who are the people who do it the best? Now, I was lucky to work with my co-founder, Chandra, who I think is truly, truly world-class. But one of the things that we spent a lot of time on is him actually try to break things down for me, try to help me understand what is the art of the thing, right? Because every discipline, every creative skill, when you stretch it out to what the very best looks like, it always is much more like an art than it is a science.
Yeah.
And so the people who are like the masters, quote, quote, or the people who are very, very good at that, often, learning from them is a lot of conversation. It's a lot of also seeing how they will tackle a problem and break it down, and just understanding their thought pattern. And from that, trying to extract like, okay, what are the principles? How can I build my own mental model and framework from what great looks like? Mm-hmm. And so I would say like, go and figure out who are the absolute best. And it's much easier these days. You can go on Twitter and you can probably figure out like who are the best designers on Twitter. And if not, an easy tactical way is I go to just one person, like any designer, and I'm like, who are the 10 designers that you admire the most? And they gave me a list. And then I would go and, recurse it, go to each of those designers, like, who are the 10 that you admire the most? Who are the 10 that and eventually you'll see patterns, because people start to converge on like which people is doing really good stuff. And this has, worked for me in engineering or even in a lot of other disciplines. But if you just ask people, eventually you do get a good list of like, oh, these people are really good. And then what I try to do is I try to look at all of their work. I try to read everything that they produced. If they blog, if they got, I try to get into their heads a little bit. And really what I'm trying to look for is like, how do they see the world? How do they think? How do they understand the art of what they do?
Yeah.
And if I'm lucky enough, if I do work in that domain, then I want to show it to those people for feedback.
Okay. Yeah. Go a step further, actually reach out to them and get feedback.
Yes, that's right. Or if maybe they're like, okay, I won't give you feedback, but I'll go and do like an introductory meeting. What I try to do is just come prepared with like, okay, this is my mental model of like what great looks like. Critique it for me. Like, is it right? Are there things that you think I'm not considering? Often, as an example, recently I'm trying to figure out how to do a better job marketing my company, Sundial. And I reached out to one of the people that I felt was like one of the absolute best at marketing. And a lot of what I just sat down with was like, here's if I were to hire someone for this role, if I were to assess someone in this role of marketing, these are the specific skills I would look for. And this is how I'm seeing what great looks like. What do you think? And then he totally critiqued my mental model. And that was very, very helpful for me. And I felt like I walked away from that conversation with like a more refined mental model for what great marketing looks like.
So what if Picasso could teach you painting, right? Let's give Picasso something to actually look at one of your paintings. And so you're going to the best, you're showing them. That's awesome. So we've zoomed in, just to recap so far, right? We've zoomed in on the future of product development is changing. The roles are getting more blurred. It's becoming really, really important to develop your product sense and product taste, and you do that by talking to the best. Now I want to zoom back out to just the fundamental concepts that you write about in your book on the making of a manager, because there's that temporal component of what's changing, but then there's all this timeless stuff. And I think the timeless stuff, you say it so well. Like other people, they may know these things, but I think they're going to get a lot of unlocks hearing you describe them. So let's start with the first one. I put taboo cards in this book because I feel like some of the things you talk about, they're like kind of taboo topics. So I want you to break these down for us. So you talk about what is a manager's job, right? And so You talk about your initial definition of what a manager's job was, have meetings with reports to help them solve their problems, share feedback about what is or isn't going well, and figure out who should be promoted and who should be fired. But what's the real definition of what a manager's job is? Today's episode is brought to you by Jira Product Discovery. If you're like most product managers, you're probably in Jira, tracking tickets and managing the backlog. But what about everything that happens before delivery? Jira Product Discovery helps you move your discovery, prioritization, and even road mapping work out of spreadsheets and into a purpose-built tool designed for product teams. Capture insights, prioritize what matters, and create roadmaps you can easily tailor for any audience. And because it's built to work with Jira, everything stays connected from idea to delivery. Used by product teams at Canva, Deliveroo, and even The Economist. Check out why and try it for free today at Atlassian.com/product-discovery. That's Atlassian.com/product-discovery. Jira Product Discovery. Build the right thing. Before we dive deeper, let's talk about something every PM faces: getting alignment on product decisions. You know that feeling when you're trying to explain a user flow to engineering or justify a design choice to leadership and you're just describing it with your hands? That's where Mobbin comes in. Mobbin is the world's largest library of real-world mobile and web app designs from industry-leading apps like Airbnb, Uber, and Pinterest. Instead of spending hours taking screenshots or hunting for inspiration, you can instantly find exactly how successful products handle onboarding, paywalls, checkout flows, whatever you're facing. Over 1.7 million product builders use Mobbin to benchmark against best-in-class products and show their teams proven solutions. Whether you need to convince stakeholders there's a better way to handle user activation or research how top apps approach feature discovery, Mobbin gives you the visual proof to back up your product decisions. Check out mobbin.com/Akash. That's mobbin.com/AAKASH and get 20% off your first year.
To me, what a manager is really trying to do is get better outcomes from a group of people towards the goal of that group. And so it is very contextual because, first of all, you have to understand what is the goal of that group. If this is a group of educators, I'm a superintendent for a school district. My job is to educate kids, like have basically the highest quality education that I can for the school district and make sure that each child is prepared, right? That's the goal. And so the job of the manager is to figure out how to use the levers, and there's 3 of them, which we'll talk about, to essentially get this group of people. You know, it's everyone on the school staff, it's all of the teachers, it's everybody, who is employed by the school district. How do you get them to work together so that you get that outcome, a better outcome than you would have gotten, let's say, if you weren't there, or if there was another random person who was managing, right? So that's really the end thing that we're trying to go after. There has to be something concrete about getting better outcomes from a group of people towards their objective. And so now we talk about levers. What are the levers of a manager? And it really comes down to 3 things. The first is people. Do you have the right people? Do you have the right teachers? Are you hiring great teachers? Are you hiring the right people to hire those teachers or manage those teachers? Or are you hiring the right staff to support those teachers, right? So people is probably the biggest lever, and the ability to hire people, to set expectations for them, to create role definitions, boundaries, and to be able to performance manage them, including fire them if it's not working, is one such lever. So that's probably the most important. The second lever is process. So sure, I might have hired all these amazing people, but how do they work together? Let's say 2 amazing people disagree. What should happen? How do we make decisions? Are we just going to argue it out? Are we going to have 3 meetings and then make a call? A lot of the how people work together, or what are the norms around how work happens, is what I call process. Yes. And then the third bucket is just purpose. It's the idea of do you have a picture and a vision, and can you get everyone aligned on what we're really trying to do together? Because even if you had great people, and even if they had, all the rules for it, if people are not on the same page about what really matters or what success looks like, then there's still going to be at odds. So all these three things are really important, and I would say are the levers of what a manager has to be able to get this group to reach their outcome.
So the original definition, the definition that most people walk in with is like, I have these discrete tasks. I'm giving feedback to people. I'm meeting with them. But the revised definition is start with the outcome and then think about how you're going to use the 3 Ps of people, process, and purpose to achieve that outcome.
That's right. Yeah.
Okay.
And all of the tasks are in service to being able to drive those outcomes, right? Which is also why, often it's very hard to just judge someone. Like if they seem busy and they're doing all the right things, I always go back to like, well, is the team better off? Are they producing better work? And what does a good outcome look like? It really only boils down to 2 things. You're either doing things at higher quality or so quality meaning like, let's say teachers, going back to our example, right? Quality of education is improved. So like all the students are better off. That's what I mean by like the work improves or the quality improves.
Yeah.
Or you're doing things faster at the same quality. So you're able to scale, right? So maybe in the same quality, but now you can do things faster, so everything's more efficient. Or perhaps one teacher can now support 50 students instead of 25 at the same quality. Like that would be another way to think about we've done better work.
And this is truly timeless. Is there anything about AI that's changing how you apply those 3 levers of people, process, and purpose? Is like I'm just wondering, AI agents, how do those fit into all of this? Is that another P asset that you need to think about deploying?
Well, it's funny because I've actually thought about agents almost like as another person in the workforce, right? So you have to pick the right, we talked about people as a lever, and maybe you can, if you add agents or this type of AI intelligence in there, you're like, okay, well, do I have the right tools, or do I have the model with the right skill set or whatever it is for my purpose? Process is still really, really important. I mean, we prompt engineering and the way that we direct AI and we help them understand what does the job look like and what does a good job look, and all of the work that goes into trying to, in a highly structured way, help them do their best work. Yeah. It's not that different in my mind with actually managing humans. For example, if you have somebody who is a very early career type of person on your team, you want to direct them well. And oftentimes that means break things down for them in a way that they can actually be effective. And I find that process of being able to break down a complex task into smaller and smaller tasks so that maybe this new grad on your team can do it is not that different from doing that with, for example, an AI agent.
Yeah, I think LLMs are brilliant interns,
yes,
right?
Exactly. Yeah. And it's and they kind of struggle sometimes with like ambiguity or complexity the same way that you might imagine, an intern or somebody who's just doesn't have a lot of experience yet might struggle.
So in the AI era, apply that same skill set. And I really like actually that you have purpose as its own, right? Because for the agent, you need to set the right purpose.
That's true, yeah.
It usually needs to be kind of narrow.
Yeah. And it needs to be like almost the first thing, right? You need to tell that this is the outcome. Like this is what you're trying to do. And by the way, and then you start with usually the process. Like this is all what you should do, or this is how you should work.
Yeah.
Right. And then of course you have to choose the right one. Like, are you going to use Claude for this one? Are you going to use OpenAI? Like, some are better than others at various tasks. Like which particular submodel, like that to me is like maybe like the people element.
Yeah. And some are like 100x more expensive than others too. So you have that same dynamic as we do with people.
Yes, that's right.
All right. So I think the first one, timeless lesson, clearly applies. The second one I have here. Okay. So this is a great one. You said, whenever a new manager joins my team, my favorite questions to ask in a few months are, what turned out to be more challenging than you expected? And what was easier than you expected? Talk to us about why those questions are so important.
I'm a big believer that a lot of human dynamics comes down to what are people's expectations and are we aligned on them? So if there was a way for you to map exactly what was in your brain into my brain, then honestly our jobs would be much easier as humans trying to connect and trying to do things together.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, we can't do that. We don't read minds. You have your own, very, very unique worldview, which comes from your own lived experience. I have mine. And oftentimes we think we might know. Like I project onto you maybe what I went through. So if I'm feeling a certain which way, I might assume that you do too, because I assume the world does.
Yeah.
But the reality is we are very different. And so questions like, what were your expectations? What was different than you expected? What was not? Help us, I think, calibrate a little bit more. So try to bring to the surface, like out explicitly on the table, where our mental models might differ. Yeah. And so for me, my job often when I'm talking to a candidate is I want to paint for them a picture of what it might look like if they come and work at my company, at Sundial, for example. And ideally, I want it to be accurate, because if it's not accurate, then what's going to happen is they're going to join, and 2 or 3 months later, they're going to be really unhappy because they felt like I presented a false image and the job's actually totally different, or, I made it seem like it was going to be amazing in these ways and that they were going to do X, Y, Z. And then they came and actually the job is ABC, and where it was like, it sucks, right? Then they're going to be really unhappy. Yeah. And they're going to lose or leave. And I'm going to lose them anyway. So it doesn't serve me. So I'm constantly trying to test how good is my explanation or my mental model, and how well does it match other people's. So if I do hire people and I give them the spiel and they turn and they tell me, actually, this was really much different than what you said, then it's new information for me, because somehow my version of reality needs a little bit more of a check. Right? Maybe it's not accurate. Maybe I'm missing something. Maybe they're seeing something that I'm not, in terms of how we might perceive the company. From their vantage point, they're seeing all these problems that I'm thinking is amazing or awesome, or so. To me, it really is always about what are the opportunities that I have to try and calibrate our respective mental models, so that we can do a better job of being aligned, so that we can go back and do the thing we're here to do together.
And if you're a new manager, what are the things you should be doing to make sure that you are meeting the company's correct definition of what good management is?
I think a lot of what I just mentioned, which is bringing up proactive situations and saying, hey, this is what I think, but am I calibrated with you?
Yeah.
Right. So for example, I might come into a company and maybe I see a project that I thought is going really, really well. So I might have this concern of I think that project is totally killing it. That's so awesome. But does everyone else see it that way? Because if I think it's going well, but everyone else thinks it's going poorly, then I'm going to have more and more issues later on as I manage and as I use my opinion or judgment in things. And so a lot of it is about just again, testing that judgment, right? It's almost A/B testing, or finding little ways of being I thought that project is really, or I went to a meeting and I thought that person led a wonderful meeting. So I want to go and actually bring that up to my manager, or bring that up to, other people that I trust in the company. I'm I thought that was awesome. Did you guys agree? Mm-hmm. And if they're yes, then I'm cool. That meant yeah, I'm pretty well, my judgment was in line with where the company is. And if they're no, that was actually awful for these reasons, then it's a learning opportunity for me to try and understand what is normal, or what is good, or what is expected in this place.
And then outside of aligning your expectations, as you're making that transition from IC to new manager, what are the biggest blind spots people have?
IC to new manager. I think the first one is that it's really hard sometimes for people to give up the IC work.
Yeah.
Because it was a great point of pride. It's something that they love doing. And frankly, they're good at it, and maybe they had the best context about it. And so moving to this mindset where you're not just contributing because of your core skill in this area, but you're also being asked to scale, is challenging. Because what I notice is that, as a new manager, and by the way, I think this is a great, this is actually a really good thing in certain contexts. But, if you look around and you're oh my God, this particular piece of code is not as good as it could be, or needs these changes, and you're a very good IC, you may have this instinct of, let me go in and let me fix it.
Yep.
But you can only do that so many times, because you only have so many hours in the day. Eventually, what you really need is hey, everyone's just writing kind of shitty code and I'm the one going in trying to fix it, this is definitely not going to scale. And so what the manager needs to elevate their mindset to is like, these are system problems. It's not just an individual example of bad code, which I myself can go, I need to fix the system problem. Why do we have so many instances of shoddy code in the team? How do I fix that? And usually, again, your lever is like, somebody else needs to play that role. Maybe the reviewers aren't doing their thing and I need to hold them accountable. Maybe I just need to hire better engineers, or maybe I have a better process, right? We're not doing code reviews and we need to do code reviews. Things like that are how you would want the person to start thinking, but it can be tough because it's like feels like so tempting to just go in and just continue to do the icy thing, which will solve the problem in its small isolated form, but may miss solving it in a broader and systematic scale.
Today's episode is brought to you by the AI PM certification on Maven. Run by Mikdad Jaffer, who is a product leader at OpenAI, this is not your typical course. It's 8 weeks of live, cohort-based learning with a leader at one of the top companies in tech. OpenAI just doesn't stop shipping, and this is your chance to learn how. Run along with product faculty and Mo Ali, the course has a 4.9 rating with 133 reviews. Former students come from companies like OpenAI, Shopify, Stripe, Google, and Meta. The best part? Your company can probably cover the cost. So if you want to get $500 off, use my code AAKASH25 and head to maven.com/product-faculty. That's maven.com/PRODUCT-FACULTY. AI evals are one of the most important skills for PMs. And I know you know they matter. The question is, are you doing them right? Most teams are winging it with basic metrics and hoping for the best. Meanwhile, the teams that actually ship reliable AI, they've cracked the code on systematic evaluation. Today's episode is brought to you by the AI Evals for Engineers and PMs course by Hamal Hussain and Shreya Shankar. This live Maven course will teach you the battle-tested frameworks from Hamal and Shreya, who are the engineers behind GitHub Copilot's evaluation system and 25 plus production AI implementations. 4 weeks, live instruction. Next cohort starts July 21st. Start shipping AI that actually works. Enroll at maven.com with my code AG-product-growth for over $800 off. That's AG-PRODUCT-GROWTH. I think anyone who's been a manager could empathize with that. So let's move into this third one. Let's say you're now leading a small team. You said that trust is the most important ingredient, and I totally agree, right? Trust is everything. You want people to be able to bring negative issues to you. And I think most of us can understand that, but the harder part is actually making an environment where people feel trust, feel safe. So how do you establish that culture?
I think the first thing that is really important is that you want to be the kind of team where we can confront reality. And reality, when I say reality, I mean what's really happening on the ground, right? Because what might be really happening on the ground is, you have a bunch of customers that don't really love what you're building, or they're unhappy, or you actually have a team that's not working very well together and they're not going to hit their deadlines that they set, And so reality is just what it is. This is like what is truly happening on the ground. But what can be tough is that sometimes we don't want to face reality because it's a problem.
Yeah.
We'd rather, of course, all of us would rather be like, the business is going great. Our customers love us. We're always on target to hit our, and so I think that if you're the kind of person who maybe almost like holds on a little too tightly to like, what is this ideal vision, and is not as open to reality, it will be very hard for other people to feel like they can be honest with you. Mm-hmm. So I would say the first thing, which is how do you get people to trust you, is be the kind of person that can face reality.
Yep.
Be the kind of person where you're not expecting everything to be perfect all the time. You may intend for it, you may wish for it, you may aspire for it, but you don't expect it. And you're the kind of person where given a problem, you're not going to, because sometimes like I think if we get too attached to this vision, it should be this way. And then some messenger comes and says something like, hey, Julie, we're not going to go and by the way, this project is really not going to hit its deadline, I might feel really upset about that, because like I have to give away, like I was very happy in my vision that, everything is going to be awesome. And now this is an issue which doesn't match my expectation. It doesn't match my expectation. And what will happen is sometimes I'll take it out, or it's natural for leaders to sometimes take it out on the messenger. It's like, why did you tell me this? Go and fix it, blah, 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 right? But the problem isn't that. The problem is not the messenger. The problem is like, this is actually happening, and you just need to be the kind of person that's okay with where reality is and not let it kill your motivation or make you angry, upset, but actually be sturdy. Just be like, okay, so that's happening. What do we need to do? And turn towards action, bias towards action. And I think if you can be that person who's collected, who's calm, who even thanks the messenger, like, I'm really happy that you brought to me an area where my understanding of how things were going was not calibrated, right? You helped me see reality. That's a wonderful thing. I appreciate people like you. I hope you do that more often. Now help me figure out how we're going to go and resolve this together.
Yeah. I think you wrote about this recently on LinkedIn, that like the people that managers value the most bring problems to them. Mm-hmm. And the hardest part is just creating this environment where you do it. So the tactics you outlined, right? Number one is like control yourself in that conversation. Number two is like, as you control yourself, actually thank them for bringing the issue to you. And then number three is like, deeply think about solving the system instead of that specific scenario. Did I get that right?
That's right. That's right.
Okay.
And also ask the person or the rest of the team for help, because I go back to like, it's not always your job. Ultimately, as a manager, as a leader, you own the outcome, but it doesn't mean you have to be the one to come up with every single solution and every single idea. And in fact, if you think that is you, that should have been another thing we talked about in terms of like, what's another blind spot that ICs often have. As an IC, you were asked to do this, and it is your job. And so if someone said, hey, you're going to do this project, like, it's on you to come up with a solution to that project. But as a manager, there's no rule that says the only solutions are the ones that come from your head. It's very, very common that great ideas are going to be across the organization. And your job is more to curate and find, like, a lot of people have great ideas. How do you curate the ideas, and how do you invite everyone else to work with you to be part of the solution, be members who can go and drive the action that solves the problem that our organization needs. So again, it doesn't all have to come from you. It's not like every single problem is ultimately you're the only person who can come up with a solve for it. There are some problems that only you can solve, but the vast majority are the kinds of things that I think great managers, they're humble enough to realize that like they should ask for help from many other parts of the organization.
And that's probably another blind spot that people have, is you have to be kind of prideful in your craft as an IC, but as you become a manager, you almost need to put the humble hat on, where you're looking for problems in your org, instead of just, we're the best, we're awesome, we're doing great.
Yeah, it's a very delicate balance. I think you can go too far on either side. So on one extreme, to your point, if you want to have enough conviction, right? Because it goes back to like, one of the things is purpose. And a lot of times people are looking to you to, at least if not have all the answers, at least have some kind of conviction in the vision and what great looks like and what are we all here to do and why does it matter. And so I think you kind of have to have some amount of conviction. And a lot of the times the teams gain energy from the fact that there's a sturdy person who has some kind of conviction, if not necessarily like, I know what the answer is, that I have conviction we will find the answer some way, somehow. So that is important. I think if you show up and you have no clue what to do and you just don't stand for anything, it's very hard to be effective in that role as a leader and as a manager. So I think that conviction, and to your point, there's some amount of like belief, trust, pride that comes from you having a good eye in things. That's got to be there. But on the other hand, if it's too far that way, right, and you're like, no, we're perfect, we're great, there's nothing wrong, then you're not even opening yourself up to reality, as we were talking about before. And that also creates issues, because then people are afraid to break your bubble. Nobody wants to tell you what's really going on. And then your image of where the organization is starts to deviate more and more from the reality. And then if you don't have a good understanding of reality, all of your judgments and all of your guesses as to what to do will be off.
So the North Star here is having a really clear-eyed picture of the strengths and weaknesses of the org that you're managing.
Yeah. And I also think that there's, I come from design, and it's obviously a very, very ambiguous, right? Same with product management. These are ambiguous problems. It isn't usually the case that someone says, hey, we have this big problem to solve. We have to figure out how to make people not get confused. It's not usually the case that like, oh yeah, I know what the solution is. But what I've learned through being a designer is that even if I don't have conviction in any solution, I can often have a lot of conviction in a process. And the process is go and talk to customers, understand the problem. If we have a very, very deep understanding of a problem, I have very strong conviction that we'll come up with a great answer. Right. Another thing that gives me a lot of conviction is this idea of iteration and moving quickly. I have a lot of conviction that, look, if we understand the problem, we'll try the thing. I may not have a lot of conviction that the thing itself is 100% going to work, but I know that if I get it out there and I get it in front of people, I get their feedback, that I will learn something. And the thing that I learn will help me make a better next version and a better next version. And so a lot of just everything I've learned about, what it's like to operate in ambiguity comes from, I think, a much deeper trust of here's the process of what it is. And that gives me a lot of, I would say, optimism for things that as long as I don't just, get lazy or give up or whatnot, that like eventually we'll find our way to something really, really great.
I want to move to this next lesson I have highlighted here, which I believe, yes, is feedback. And you talked a little bit about this, right? Performance managing people. And how do you really deliver feedback that leads to positive action?
So the most important thing is that we have to talk about what is feedback and why does it matter. And what I think we do for each other when we give feedback is we're kind of holding up a mirror for the other person that reflects back something that we see, with the hopes that the other person will then recognize something and it helps them become the kind of person that they're proud to be. So again, go back to like feedback is just a tactic. What's the end goal? The goal is to help the other person make a change to become a person that they want to be. So when they look back, they're really proud of it. So that's what I mean by that's what I think really, really good feedback is. And I think both of, if I were to ask you, Akash, like what's some of the best feedback you have ever received? It probably has that quality where someone said something, they made you aware of something you weren't aware of. And in becoming aware, you change your actions, which allowed you to become the person that you're happy with, or like a quality that you're happy with, right? So that's what we're trying to do. And so you think about it, feedback is really a gift. We're trying to do something that helps the other person. So I think the most important thing that helps feedback land well is you genuinely have to care about the person and care about the fact that you're trying to help them. And this sounds really obvious, but I will tell you that even in my own experience, there are times, with my kids, with my husband, with people at work, where sometimes my motivation for giving feedback is I just want to be right. I just want, like, I feel a little bit peeved. Maybe I feel like there was an injustice and I want to tell them how they really pissed me off. In that moment, there's a difference in the feeling, right? The feeling is like, I'm trying to get it off my chest because I feel bad and I want to feel better. I can tell you from a lot of experience that it's unlikely to land in the way that I want.
Yeah.
But if I can really, give myself a moment, calm down and think about it, and, maybe the substance of the feedback is the same, but now my attitude is, this person really needs to hear it because they may not be aware of the impact that these words have on me, and they'll probably keep saying it to other people, and other people will have that type of reaction, and it would help them to be aware of this so that they don't do it again. Right? If that's you see the difference is like, the substance can be exactly the same, but my mentality makes all the difference. Yeah. And if I have the second mentality, then the way that I will deliver the feedback, the style, the tone, the words I use, my facial expression, my body language, it's going to be totally different. It's going to connote care for the other person. It's going to connote, or it's going to, convey a sense of respect. And it's going to make it far more likely that they're going to hear the message and it will truly change them.
Mm-hmm. If you have that caring, that empathy, and you don't bring that emotional baggage of just trying to do it for yourself, but you're doing it for them.
Yes. That's the single most important thing. And everything else just naturally, I think, falls into line if that's the mentality that you carry.
So it's less about the tactics of delivering sandwich feedback or those types of things, and it's more about the right mindset going in.
That's the most important. I know, I think there are still tactics. I think a very important tactic is also, I even have like a particular script that I sometimes give people if they're feeling very nervous about giving feedback. And the script goes something like, you start with how I felt, like Akash, or you start with like a particular fact. When you failed to respond to me after I pinged you 4 times, I felt, how did I feel? Nervous. I felt rejected, maybe. I felt disappointed because it made me think that maybe I was doing something wrong, or maybe you didn't care about me, or whatever it is, right? That's a general script. So therefore I wanted to bring this up so that I could really understand your perspective and how we can make our relationship work. So that is the general feeling of the script. Start with something factual, like this thing happened. How did it make me feel? Because usually this feeling is some kind of negative. I felt worried. I felt again, disappointed, et cetera, et cetera. Why? Well, I felt that way because I assumed X, Y, Z. And so now my goal is to bring this to the table and just try and see if my assumptions are right, or maybe they're not, or like how can you help me, essentially, like, and help and be a part of working this out with me, because I really value our relationship and I want to make sure that we can grow in our trust of each other and the way that we can work together.
So those are 4 of the timeless nuggets that I thought we had to cover here, because we're trying to cover everything it is people need to know to be a good AI product or design leader. So bring it back to that. How is AI changing product and design leadership?
I think the first thing is that it is a time of great uncertainty. I think we have to acknowledge that. I think, you started by saying a lot of people are really nervous. Will my role still be around in 10 years? What does it mean for me and my career? You and I are talking about roles blending, and like we're not going to have these like very, very well-defined career ladders as we used to have in the past. Like, what does that mean? And so I think the first thing that leaders have to understand is that there's a lot of uncertainty, and people might rightly be nervous and they don't know what to expect. And so I think sturdiness is really important. Sturdiness being the quality of like I think a lot about like a willow tree, which is a type of tree that is very, very strong, but the limbs are quite flexible. Right? So it's a sturdy tree, but it isn't brittle. It's not like you snap it and it breaks. And I think that's kind of the feeling that we need to convey, that yes, it's a time of change. We're not trying to deny it and that things will change, but let's go back to like what are the true principles that keep us together? And I think every company or every organization is trying to do good work has those principles, which is, what are we here to do? What's our outcome? What's the vision? And if we have all of these great tools and this better technology, then like, might we see it as an exciting time rather than just a purely fearful / negative time? So I think a lot of it about it is like, acknowledge where we are, but also use that as an opportunity to create a new narrative for like what, again, goes back to like what greatness looks like and how it can help, how all of this change can likely help us achieve or get to the outcome that we're all here to do. So I think acknowledge the uncertainty, take the time to craft like a new narrative, help people understand like what really matters and what are the things that are timeless, even despite this change. And the third is be very experimental. Going back to our analogy of the willow tree, this is a time for experimentation. This is not a time when anyone, including me, can sit here and be like, what you need to do? It's like A, B, C, D. That those are it. If you do it, you're going to succeed. I think all of us have to take this mindset of like, yeah, we can get great ideas from a lot of places, but we have to try them and we have to see how it works and we have to iterate our way. So as an example, we mentioned, just to take this example of like maybe some teams today are constructed where you need one of each of these roles in order to be able to have a team that can go in and operate. Well, is that really true? Could it be the case that we might just have two people work on something, and could they ship it end to end? I don't know. It's an experiment. Let's try it. Let's see what we learn. And from the learnings, again, it's probably not binary. We'll learn something, we'll evolve it. Okay, so how should we piece together the working groups or pods of the future? And I think framing everything as this is an experiment and we're going to try it, and we're going to, this is how we're going to set up the experiment, but then this is what we're going to notice, or this is how we're going to debrief on it and take away the learnings. Like, I think that we have to kind of embrace experimentation and iteration in this period, and it's not following tried and true playbooks of the past. It's like all of us trying to adopt new things, try this thing, try that thing, and then figure out for ourselves what's going to happen. And I felt like the best companies have always kind of carried a little bit of that, right? Not ever, every company who's kind of gone and innovated in the way that they work has kind of had that sense. I just think more companies have to be forced to do that now, because we're in a time of greater change.
Yeah. Start from the first principles of the talents you have and the things you need to accomplish, instead of, okay, these are the traditional titles that I would put against a problem to solve a problem. Be experimental with how you're building your teams.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And then also I think that leaders have to try and really pay attention to like what are the mental models that people are carrying, because they may be older mental models.
Yeah.
Right. And if it's, if it goes back to like, if your mental model is very different from mine, then we're definitely going to be at odds on one decision or another somewhere down the line. And so I think we have to be very clear, like, what are people's mental models, and let's just make them explicit and be able to actually have like open discussion about like, okay, no, that was the old mental model. Now we're going to try a different way. And that does mean we're going to have to, do things differently. I think when people's expectations are set that like, yeah, okay, we are going to do things differently, or, and one example for me is like, we ran a hackathon recently for our team. And I was really blown away by all of the different ideas that came out of the hackathon. And people felt like far more empowered, or there were like, one or two people were able to build so much more, especially using all of these AI tools. And it was interesting because it almost felt like people had permission to do a lot of things that maybe they didn't feel like they had when it wasn't hackathon time. And that was quite surprising to me, because I didn't realize that like there's a different mental model. Because for me, I'm like, oh, aren't we the kind of company where everyone can just have an idea and do it, and if they wanted to? But I think for everyone else, like, actually the mental model sometimes can be very unconscious in terms of like, well, what does the day job look like versus like, what does hackathon look like, right? And how do we, bridge the gap, or how do we become explicit about the fact that that is actually what people think?
Yeah, I think a lot of people feel that way coming out of hackathons. It's a really good tactic probably for creating a little bit more of that ownership mentality, a little bit more of thinking of the ideas instead of just being handed them. So we talked about those elements that you just highlighted. I think that's going to take you to modern product design and leadership, good stuff. What makes a really great product leader in the age of AI?
I think a really great product leader is somebody who is pretty, is very, very solid in like things like, what is the problem that we're trying to solve? What's the mission? What are we here for? So all of those principles, those core principles of like understanding the problem, the customers, the user, that continues to be true. That was true then, that's true now. So I'm saying that still continues to be somebody that, or a person needs to kind of have that. I think the second is what I mentioned. Like, I think you have to be very much a learner. So there's a lot changing about the world. I think you kind of have to be at that cutting edge. Like, if you don't understand where technology is today, it's very hard to say that you're a great product leader in the age of AI. You have to understand the tool. And that just means all of us, who are trying to be good product leaders, like, we need to be building things with these tools. We need to be using the tools. We need to be the first people to have switched our habits over from what they used to be. We're the ones who need to throw away our old systems of working and use them as an opportunity to like test what this new generation of tools has to offer, right?
Yeah.
I even say that as somebody who, I have a very traditional way of like writing, because I love writing. And I realize, no, but the world is changing. Like, I need to actively disrupt how I go about writing or communicating, even though that's something that I felt like I honed and maybe I thought I was like getting reasonably good at. But all that is changing, because like that's like people are going to do it differently. And if like I'm not there in the trenches, like actively trying to figure out how these things are changing, like why would I expect anybody else on my team to do that as well? So I think like leading by example in being at the forefront of using things and disrupting our old habits and ways of doing things is also really, really important. I think the third is, as we said, the kind of experimental, being able to direct and lead a team through this period of change and nimbleness, flexibility. I think that's really important. I think that all of us, just going back to like, we're all beginners here again, right? Going back to remove our identity from what it was that got us here. Like I'm sure many of our listeners are very esteemed and experienced product leaders. But even that idea of like, we're good product leaders, almost feel like, let's throw that out the window. Are we actually really good product leaders in this new era? I don't know. I think we have to earn that. We have to almost go back to like being a beginner, get back on in the ring, build some things in this new way, and actually earn the stripes again to be considered somebody who is a great, I don't know if I'm a great product leader in the era of AI. I hope I can be. I hope I want to go back and like I every day try to show up and do these things, but I can't say that I am yet.
With that in mind, staying humble, what are the right tools? Let's say I'm a product leader and I haven't really embraced those AI tools. If I wanted to catch up to the latest in August 2025, what are those AI tools I should be using in my work?
Oh, I mean, so much. I mean, the default one that I'm sure, is already well known is like, all you do is just use ChatGPT and you just incorporate way more of that through your workflow. To me, it's like less about tooling and more about when we use it, right?
Okay.
I think there's a lot of things, and I catch myself daily where I have this idea. My first instinct is to just do it the way I would have done it. Like, I'm going to create a doc. I'm going to go in and actually create, the Slack post. And now even the idea of like, wait, can I get feedback first from ChatGPT? Can I run my high level thinking and ask it to poke holes at my mental model or my assumptions?
Yeah.
Can I ask it to like read anything that I write and like just tell me what it thinks like my blind spots are from reading this? Can I ask it to analyze like a bunch of emails and tell me patterns in terms of like, what am I not? I mean, even just the idea of thinking about all of the ways in which we can get value, like I'm sure that for me, I'm barely scratching the surface of conceptualizing the ways that I could use even that particular tool, right? So that's probably one of the first things is even if that's just your tool and you're just like, okay, how can I use it to its maximum extent? I think we're quite far from it, like in most of our day-to-day lives. I think then there's building tools. Like I use a variety. I use Cursor a lot for prototyping and building. I've also used Lovable. I've tried to actually use a lot of different tools because I'm trying to understand, going back to understanding people. Like if you're going to go and you have a role, you'd probably want to interview multiple candidates for your role, for that role. So you can kind of understand what are the strengths and weaknesses of different candidates. And I kind of have that approach with a lot of tools. So I try to use as many as possible for different things so that I can get a sense of like, what is the strength and weaknesses of that tool? What is the, what's the kind of personality, or sometimes it's even stylistic, which one just sort of resonates with me or fits the way that I want to work a little bit more. So I do try and like, just even if I have like a new task and like, yes, I could have done that in Cursor. Sometimes I'll be like, well, let me use V0 for that. Let me just try this. And then, build up a little bit more of my knowledge. And so that's, I use, what else do I use? I use, like recently I started using Claude Code. I was just trying and experimenting with that. I love Granola for meeting notes. I do a lot of meetings. And so I think that's a fabulous tool for helping me. It just takes away that whole like taking notes and summarizing and makes the workflow really, really easy. Obviously use my tool, Sundial, for data analysis, even including, how we think about what's going on with customers or like our sales leads. Like we use Sundial for internal analysis as well. And I try to be, like I'm just very curious about other things. Like I got I forgot the name. I'm really bad with names. There's like a cleaning robot recently. So little examples of like even hardware or other things. I'm very curious to try this. Oh, another one is like a pendant. I don't have it with me today, but like limitless pendant. That one is really, it's basically like a little clip and it just hears all the audio that's going on. I really like to use it at home with my family and my kids because it gives me feedback on my parenting.
Whoa. That's amazing.
Yeah.
I need that.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. And and everything gives you a little sense, right? Like even I wouldn't have expected it. I like got it. I was like, oh, this is kind of cool. I wasn't thinking that like, oh, the use case is that it'll actually help me be a more aware parent. But sometimes it will say things like, maybe you should let your kids talk a little more because like you said this thing and then they started talking and you kind of cut them off. And I was like, whoa. And that's really awesome. Yeah.
Wow. Analyzing your own conversations. Yeah. How should product leaders be using AI data tools?
I think, so my answer to a lot of your questions have this pattern of like, well, what are some of the principles that are like timeless, right? And then how do we think about the tooling layer on top of that? I think a lot of what I'm seeing right now is that we see a lot of huge organic growth because there's so much market pull for the next generation. I mean, we see that with ChatGPT in terms of its growth, obviously Cursor, Replit, like there's these, companies are scaling faster than ever because they've unlocked something really remarkable, which has made it so that, it used to be only people who could code, but now lots of people can go and actually create an app. And it used to be like only certain people could answer medical questions or, pay for therapists. And now you've like got a tool that can kind of do that, right? And that's awesome because you see like a lot of organic growth. But I think what's important with any sort of analysis is like the whole point of data is to give you a better view of reality and what's going on. And so it's not always just like, oh, if things are going well, then you don't need to look at the data, right? I go back to like the best teams that I've ever seen use data are the ones in which people on the ground are like absolutely fanatical about trying to understand what is the real phenomenon that's happening, and as much texture as possible. And so the texture can come, from like talking to your customers. Like if you talk to your customers all the time, you're gonna get a lot of texture about like what's working, what do they hate, what do they not. I consider that data. But I also think that's true quantitatively as well, which is like, what are people doing? What are they clicking on? How much time did they spend? What are the use cases? Which use cases are growing for your tools, which aren't? And a lot of times, I talk to a lot of these startup founders and like, they don't actually know. They know, like they have maybe good texture if they talk to their customers, but they don't always know exactly like what's happening in the product because it isn't instrumented. And even if it is instrumented, it isn't like brought together in an operational model that's easy. Like I think about everything as like, this is just observability. So good analytics is observability for your business. And the more refined your model, meaning the more things you log and track and you understand which metrics impact which things, the easier it is for then if like, something starts to go off, you catch it early, right? You don't wait until like, oh my gosh, growth has stopped or stalled. You catch it when the trend is starting early. So that would be what I would say to everybody who, even if you're growing like a rocket ship and things are going really well, you got to ask yourself, how much do you really understand about how all of the different users are using the product? And the narrower you can go, where you're like, which kind of user, which use cases are growing well, which features are being used, what's the, trend or the impression, what's the conversation in the marketplace about, right? There's a lot of really great tools that can help you now get more and more of that color and that fidelity. But even the best tools won't matter if the person doesn't feel like they want to get exposed to those things, if they want to actively be looking for those things. And so it still goes back to like, you have to be the kind of person who's absolutely curious and maybe fanatical about just understanding reality.
I like how it came full circle back there. So we talked about this a little bit, we talked about the importance of taste, and we talked about, and you previewed, what happens when AI has better taste than you?
I think it's coming. So let's zoom back. This is what I think is the state of the world today, right? AI is, I would say, maybe in the 70th or 80th of a lot of things. So it's like probably better than average. It certainly is average in terms of the content that's online about a lot of stuff. It's probably a little bit biased towards like, more knowledge, because like the kinds of people who write the stuff or write books about it is like maybe has structured it, or kind of has like a little bit more depth of understanding. But it isn't usually great at like the cutting edge today, right? And that's true with design. I think that's true with like the engineering. It's true with even writing. Like it's not as good as a Hemingway or a C.S. Lewis or any of that. And so it, we can say that it's like slightly better than average on a lot of stuff. And so so then if we look at, okay, like, well, let's say I'm an individual, there's certain things that I think I've invested a lot of my time and energy into, and so maybe I can do better than AI. But there's like a whole lot of stuff that I'm worse than where the bar is. And so if I'm worse where the bar is, then AI is actually doing better than me, and I should just kind of trust it more and use it more, right? So examples for me include things like anything that's related to go-to-market. Like I'm kind of a noob there, and so all of its ideas that AI has for me is like clearly better than mine. So I should probably follow more of that and not just rely on my own instincts. Similarly, maybe drawing or illustration. Like I think I draw fine, but clearly like it's doing much better than me already in terms of like what Midjourney and other things can create. So like, cool, I'm going to use that, and I'm just going to go with what its recommendations are. And maybe I can continue to develop my eye, but I know it can certainly, there are areas where like, look, I can just kind of trust it a little bit more. And if I don't trust it enough, I'll try and like go back to like find the expert who's still a human, and have them help me out. Mm-hmm. Now, in areas where I think I'm still better than AI, I think a couple of things. The first is I should assume that at the rate of change, one day AI will have better taste than me, mm-hmm. right? And so what I can continue to try and do in all respects is continue to train my eye, because the eye is easier to train usually than the hand. So this also brings us back to what we were talking about in the initial parts of our conversation today, which is like, how can I learn from the best so that I have, maybe for as long as possible, have an advantage in terms of at least knowing or recognizing what great is. And so then I will have more of an ability to direct the AI towards, so I can try and do that as long as possible. Okay. But let's assume that one day AI gets better than me, than even at that, because we're getting just better and better intelligence. I think then, okay, what does that world look like? I don't know. I think there's like a lot of speculation. I think like lots of things will break or be better. But I will say that one thing that I think AI can never really take away from us is the journey and the process of learning and growing and doing things that we're proud of. Right? And so for me, I look at this example of chess. So it's been a while now since computers have bested humans at the game of chess. But it isn't the case that somehow we all gave up and nobody plays chess anymore, because what's the point? Because AI is better than humans. I think actually chess has become way more popular since we've had AI come to the forefront and all those news articles about how it, bested the best chess player. And I think a lot of the reason why is it's still an inherently human activity to want to choose to do this thing, to compete against someone, to feel like you're getting better in this particular skill, even if you're not going to be the best in the world at it because AI is better than you. There is still something very human, very joyful about doing these things.
Yeah.
Right? And that is very human, So even if AI can do all of these skills better than me, I don't think it should take away from the fact that if I derive joy, pleasure, and meaning from getting better at certain skills, let me continue to do that. Let everyone continue to do that. Let us all enjoy chess for the sheer joy of playing the game. Mm-hmm. And that might be a fine world for us to be in.
Speaking of learning from the best, you get to work with some of the best product leaders in the world because you build data analytics products for the product leaders at OpenAI. What have you learned from them? What do they do differently?
I think that they are So first, OpenAI, wonderful company, really amazing, super, super high talent density. I will say is they work really hard. And I think that that's probably already well known, but it's such a competitive time right now.
Like 7 days a week is what I hear.
And so I can tell you, yeah, like people are looking at data and dashboards and stuff like every day of the week. So that data point number one. I think data point number two is it alludes to what I was speaking of earlier, which is that having a very, very, very detailed and refined understanding of what is happening on the ground. So like every single day, I see analysts and data practitioners from OpenAI come in, and they are just, they're like, their usage is extremely deep. They spend a lot of time, and that's because anytime something changes, this amount grew, like, this country grew by this amount, or this country sort of stalled. They want to understand why. Why did it happen? What does it tell us? What can we learn? Is there a pattern? Is there something that we can do to change that trend if we don't like it? But even not, do we start to understand a little bit more about human nature and the nature of our customers, or what works for them, or what they want, or how they behave? So it's, I think, this extremely obsessive need to like get at the deeper explanation of understanding what is really going on. And I think the other thing is just like good hygiene, right? What I see like really top companies have is this hygiene of like, we have a metrics review every week. Why? A lot of the purpose of a metrics review, is, metrics review is essentially like, you get a group of leaders there, and everyone looks at the numbers, the KPIs and the dashboards, and everyone talks about like how they're trending. And I think that that's really important because it does a couple things. So first is it creates alignment. Right. Everyone now understands, okay, we're on the same page about the story. If we didn't do that, you may have a week where you think, oh, our company is doing really awesome. We had a great month. And I might think, no, we did really poorly. And it's because I have one anecdote about how like we lost 2 clients, but you're like looking at how many features we shipped. So it's like we have a different frame, we have different mental model of like what success looks like. I think when you go back and you have like a really great observability layer, and you've kind of agreed that this is the right observability layer for like truly, measuring reality. And therefore you also have a forum in which every week we can get out in there and we're like, wow, I can say something like, well, we had a great week. And you're like, wait, why do you think that? We had a shitty week? Because then we're on the same page, right? That is a forum for us to be able to align as a leadership team or as a group on that. So that's, I think, the hygiene of something like a metrics review. I think the second one is just, like if you're representing a particular country and that went down, it's an accountability where we're like, hey, Akash, why did it go down? And you should be expected to like know, because you've done your research, because you're curious. And if not, it sort of builds that discipline that like we should know. It's your responsibility to go and figure it out. It's my responsibility for like the areas that I own. So I think the metric review provides that kind of rigor, so that we can be accountable to understanding what is actually happening and why, so that we can be more in control of it. Mm-hmm. I think the third thing that it does well is that it allows us to have like a shared common language, which we can then take back to the rest of our teams. Yeah. About so I do see like some of the best companies have that kind of rigor when it comes to understanding their analytics, which in my mind is just rigor about like understanding operationally how things work and what all the levers are.
So today we covered, I think, all 360 degrees of being a great AI product leader. The reason you become tech's favorite management guru is this book. So I'm curious, for people who are creators, who want to learn, like, how did you create a Wall Street Journal best-selling book on management?
It's hard to answer that, because for me, I liked writing, and writing works for me, and on honesty, because I always felt like I was a better writer. I was a clearer communicator in writing than in person. And it's taken me a lot of time to develop, but I used to get a lot of feedback that I rambled a lot. I didn't quite get to the point very quickly. It was hard for me to think on my feet. And so writing for me is like a way of actually getting my thoughts more clearly articulated. And so I started the practice when I was at Facebook, I would go into a meeting and everybody would be talking and I would like struggle to figure out what to say. And my manager actually gave me a lot of feedback that like, hey, you need to like speak up more. Like, we don't know what you're thinking. And so my first instinct is, okay, so maybe after the meeting, I'll just write what I was thinking. That's how it started. And then I realized it was actually almost very therapeutic for me. And I thought about my writing as letters to myself. And a lot of this book is essentially that. One of the primary reasons that I decided to even take on writing this book is I thought if I wrote a book about management, it's like writing this giant letter to myself about what it is that I want to be and how to get the values that I have on paper in a way that will help me become a better manager. So I still am on that journey. I still am trying every day to be a better manager. I think there's so much for me to learn and grow. I think as with a lot of things, sometimes the theory is easier to explain and the practice is still hard.
Yeah.
So much of life is like that, right? Like we might understand intellectually that this is what it is, like even very basic stuff like talk to your customers, but the actual reality of doing it day in and day out is a practice. And I think about management or leadership or any of the stuff that we do, design, like product, these are practices. Mm-hmm. And the only way, there's no perfection. The only thing we can do is just show up, do the practice, and through the art of doing the practice, hopefully derive a lot of joy and meaning and watch ourselves become better day over day than where we were yesterday.
Wow, what a way to end the podcast. After literally years of reading your content, this conversation over-delivered. Thank you so much.
Thank you. This was really fun. And I mean, you do amazing work too. So I'm a big fan of your podcast and your newsletter. And I love that you try so hard to make this knowledge accessible and make all of us better.
Appreciate that. All right, everybody. We'll see you later. I really hope you guys enjoyed that episode. It would mean a ton to me and the team if you could please subscribe on YouTube, follow on Apple and Spotify podcasts, and leave a rating and review. Those ratings and reviews really help grow the show and help other people discover the show. And they help fund the production so that we can do bigger and better productions. Can't wait to share the next episode with you. Until then, see you later.